Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became a monster hunter in a world without heroes. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wall was the first and last thing you saw of Muzurifu. It was a god. A titan of plasteel and iron, a sheer, 500-meter-high testament to humanity's defiance. Its surface, a dark, non-reflective gray, was a tapestry of scars. Gouges the size of trade barges scraped diagonally across its face, souvenirs from monsters long dead. Craters, pockmarked and deep, spoke of battles where brute force met immovable object. At its zenith, a shimmering, near-invisible energy barrier hummed a constant, low thrum, the city's final prayer against anything that could fly. This was the world. Not a world of heroes and villains, of grand ideologies clashing in vibrant cityscapes. There were no quirks, no superpowers gifted by a trick of evolution. Humanity had reached for the stars and found them occupied. They had plumbed the depths of the earth and found them teeming. The power in this world wasn't born, it was slain, carved, and forged. This was a world of monsters, and where there were monsters, there were hunters. Inside the monolithic walls of Muzurifu, the heart of the city beat in the grand hall of the Hunters' Guild. It was a cavernous space, its ceiling held aloft by pillars carved from the fossilized leg bones of a long-extinct behemoth. The air was thick with the smell of whetstones, curing leather, and roasted meat from the roaring hearth of the canteen. Sunlight, filtered through massive stained-glass windows depicting legendary hunts, painted the hall in hues of blood red and gold. Hunters of all stripes milled about. A towering man with arms like tree trunks, his armor a patchwork of crimson scales and black horns, laughed a booming laugh as he sharpened a great sword that looked more like a slab of iron than a weapon. A lithe woman, her gear crafted from iridescent insect carapaces, gracefully vaulted onto a table, her comrades cheering. They were the celebrities, the saviors, the living symbols of humanity's will to survive. Their power was tangible, worn on their bodies like a second skin. And then there was Izuku Midoriya. Tucked away in the furthest, quietest corner of the guild complex was the Aegis Archive, a library whose silence was a stark contrast to the boisterous energy of the Grand Hall. Here, the smell was of aged paper, dust, and ink. Shelves groaned under the weight of countless leather-bound tomes, bestiaries, anatomical studies, field reports from fallen hunters, and metallurgical treatises on forging monster parts into weapons. Here, amidst the silent ghosts of 1,000 hunts, Izuku was in his element. At 16, he was a study in contradictions. His frame was slight, his shoulders narrow, a stark contrast to the brawny aspirants training in the guild yards. A chaotic mop of dark green hair shadowed a face splattered with freckles, but his eyes, wide and a startlingly vibrant emerald, held an intensity that could burn holes through steel. They darted across the page of a massive, open book, his hand flying across the surface of his own, much smaller notebook. Rathian, the queen of the land. Wyvern species. Note the powerful legs for terrestrial pursuit, unlike the male Rathalos's focus on aerial dominance. Key feature, venomous barbs on tail club. Toxin analysis report 481C suggests a neurotoxin, requiring potent antidote derived from the herbal blue mushroom combo. Armor forged from its plating shows high fire resistance, but is surprisingly vulnerable to dragon element. Why dragon? What is the biological basis for this elemental weakness? Is it a molecular resonance? A protein incompatibility? Need to cross-reference with Elder Dragon reports. His muttering was a constant, breathless stream of consciousness, a habit that had earned him more than a few strange looks. His notebook, Monster Analysis for the Future, Volume 13, was his life's work. It was a chaotic masterpiece of meticulous sketches, color-coded annotations, and frantic, barely legible theories. He drew the Rathian's tail barb from 3 different angles, adding notes on the optimal angle of impact for a cutting weapon to sever it cleanly versus the blunt force needed to break it. This was his weapon. Not a blade, not a shield, but knowledge. In a world that worshipped the strength to swing a 30-kilogram hammer, Izuku worshipped the data that told you exactly where to swing it. Still hiding in here with your picture books, Deku? The voice was laced with the casual cruelty of youth. Izuku flinched, snapping his head up. 2 hunter aspirants, broad-shouldered and clad in basic leather training gear, stood in the archive's doorway. The one who spoke, a boy with spiky brown hair, smirked. "Heard you failed the physical aptitude test again," the other one added, leaning against the doorframe. "Lowest score in the guild's history," they said. "Can't even lift a basic iron long sword properly. Deku. Useless." The nickname had stuck to him like resin. In their world, a person who couldn't fight was a person who couldn't contribute. He was a burden, a mouth to feed who couldn't pull his weight on a hunt. Izuku's face flushed. He hunched over his notebook, making himself a smaller target. "I am not hiding. I'm studying. A hunter's greatest tool is knowledge." The first boy snorted, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Yeah? Let's see how much your knowledge helps you when a Gypsuro spits poison in your face. You can't outthink a charging Diablo's Deku. You either have the guts and the muscle, or you end up as Monster Chow. Stop dreaming and stick to sharpening pencils." They laughed and walked away, their heavy boots echoing down the stone corridor, leaving Izuku alone in the suffocating silence. His knuckles were white where he gripped his pen. Their words were nothing he hadn't told himself 1,000 times. He was weak. During the aptitude test, his hands had trembled just trying to hold a standard-issue shield. He saw the pity and disappointment in the instructor's eyes, but still, the dream burned. He didn't just want to be a hunter. He wanted to be the kind of hunter who saved people, the kind who could walk into a village under siege and make everyone feel safe, just by being there. A symbol. He had grown up on the tales of the first star hunter, the one they called All Might, a man whose strength was so legendary he could supposedly hunt elder dragons alone, a man who smiled in the face of certain death. Izuku took a shaky breath, his eyes falling back to his notebook. He couldn't lift the sword, no, but he knew, with every fiber of his being, that he could tell someone else how to swing it better than anyone in the entire guild. That had to be worth something. It just had to. He spent the rest of the afternoon lost in his research, mapping out the migratory patterns of a desert-dwelling beast and cross-referencing them with geological surveys of the surrounding area. It was calming, structured. It was safe. The real world, with its physical demands and jeering peers, felt a million miles away. He was so engrossed that he didn't notice the time until the low, golden light of late afternoon began to slant through the high arched windows. Packing his notebook carefully into his worn leather satchel, he left the quiet sanctuary of the archive. He needed to pick up a few things from the lower market ring before heading home. The walk from the guild's pristine central plaza to the lower districts was like a journey through the city's social strata. The gleaming marble and heroic statues gave way to sturdy, functional stone, then to crowded tenements of brick and recycled metal. The air grew thicker, filled with the smells of sizzling street food, industrial lubricants, and the faint, ever-present scent of the thousands of people packed into the city's working-class heart. The lower market ring was a chaotic, vibrant place, a circular artery built around the inner circumference of the city wall. It was here that the massive supply convoys came and went through the heavily fortified cargo gates. Izuku navigated the throng of merchants, off-duty laborers, and families with practiced ease, his mind already drifting to what monster parts he could afford for his personal study. Maybe a spare farm from a Giapre, or a chipped scale from a great Jaggi. He was haggling with a vendor over the price of a slightly dented Thunderbug casing when the world went sideways. It started not with a roar, but with a sound that was far more terrifying to the citizens of Muzurifu, the high-pitched, discordant shriek of a gate failure siren. For a split second, the entire market froze. Every head snapped towards the source of the sound, Gate 7, the main cargo entrance for the western sector. The normal, rhythmic thud of its hydraulic locks was gone, replaced by a horrifying, high-tension groan of tortured metal. Then, with a deafening bang like a thunderclap, the inner blast door buckled. A massive dent, 3 meters wide, appeared in the plasteel, its edges glowing a dull red from the force of the impact. Panic erupted. The organized chaos of the market dissolved into pure, primal fear. Screams tore through the air as people scrambled, tripping over stalls and each other in a desperate surge away from the gate. Merchants abandoned their wares. Parents grabbed their children and ran. Izuku was swept up in the tide, his small frame buffeted by the terrified crowd. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of adrenaline and terror. A breach. not a drill. This is real. The guild's emergency protocols were supposed to be flawless. An outer gate, an inner gate, a kill zone in between. For a monster to reach the inner door meant a catastrophic failure. A second, louder bang echoed through the market, and the dent in the blast door deepened. The metal shrieked as it was peeled back from the top, revealing a sliver of darkness from the tunnel beyond. Civilians, clear the area! Form an orderly line towards the inner shelters! A voice bellowed. Through a gap in the fleeing crowd, Izuku saw them. 4 guild security hunters, the city's first line of defense. They weren't the glamorous heroes from the Grand Hall, but hardened veterans in standard-issue iron armor. They formed a phalanx in front of the failing gate, their shields locked, their lances pointed forward. With a final, grotesque tearing sound, a section of the door ripped open. A creature, wiry and reptilian, scrambled through the gap. It was a scrap-tailed jagras. Not a massive threat by guild standards, barely a 1-star quest monster. But here, in the enclosed, crowded space of the market, it was a demon. It was about the size of a large wolf, its body covered in a patchwork of mangy, yellow-green fur and scales that looked like shards of rusted metal. Its head was a nightmare of needle-like teeth, and its unnaturally large jaw could unhinge to swallow prey whole. It moved with a twitchy, nervous energy, its head darting back and forth, its forked tongue tasting the scent of fear in the air. The lead security hunter barked an order. Engage! Keep it contained! Don't let it reach the crowd. The hunters moved with practiced efficiency, but the monster was faster and more agile than they anticipated. It dodged the first lance thrust, scrambling up a pile of discarded cargo containers with unnatural speed. From its elevated perch, it let out a series of sharp, yipping calls, a sound that sent a fresh wave of ice through Izuku's veins. It's calling its pack. The jagras leaped down, landing directly on one of the hunters. The man grunted as claws and teeth tore at his armor, the sound of metal scraping on metal grating on the ears. The other hunters rushed to help, breaking their formation. It was the opening the creature needed. It spun, its thick tail whipping around and catching another hunter in the knees, sending him sprawling. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The hunters were trained for open-field combat, not this kind of chaotic, close-quarters brawl against a creature that used the environment to its advantage. Izuku, pressed against the wall of the noodle stall, found himself unable to run. His feet were rooted to the spot, his mind kicking into overdrive against his will. His fear was a cold, hard knot in his stomach, but another part of him, the analyst, the obsessive researcher, was taking over. Scrap-tailed jagras. Scavenger species, highly opportunistic. Not typically aggressive unless cornered or leading a pack. Pack structure is hierarchical, led by a larger great jaggy. This one is a lone scout, likely separated from its pack during the convoy passage. Its movements are erratic, favoring its right side. Why? Is it injured? His eyes, wide with a mixture of terror and intense focus, scanned the creature's body. He saw it then. A slight, almost imperceptible limp in its left hind leg. It was subtle, but it was there. Every time it landed, it put less weight on that leg. A memory surfaced, clear as day. A dry, boring report he'd read just 3 days ago, filed by a low-rank hunter named Kido after a minor skirmish. Report 734B. Encounter with jagras pack near the western quarry. Minor engagement, no casualties. Drove off the pack with signal flares. Noted one smaller male jagras sustained a glancing blow from a falling rock during the retreat. Possible hairline fracture to the left fibula. Subject escaped. Threat level, negligible. Negligible. It's the leg, Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. Its left leg is injured. The jagras, having momentarily disoriented the hunters, turned its attention to the fleeing civilians. It saw easier prey. A small girl, no older than 5, had fallen and was crying on the ground, separated from her mother in the stampede. The monster's head snapped towards the sound, its predatory instincts locking on. Time seemed to slow down. The security hunters were too far away, tangled up with their fallen comrade. The crowd was a wall of backs. The monster lowered its head and began to stalk forward. Something inside Izuku broke. The fear, the self-doubt, the years of being called useless, it all vanished, replaced by a single, roaring imperative, "Save her." He couldn't fight it. He couldn't lift a sword. But he had his voice. He saw a young city guard, barely older than himself, cowering behind an overturned cart. He wasn't a hunter, just a municipal officer armed with a simple long spear and a round metal shield. His face was pale, his hands shaking so hard his spear tip rattled against the cobblestones. He was completely frozen by fear. Izuku scrambled over to him, grabbing his arm. The guard jumped, yelping in surprise. Hey! Get back! The guard stammered. Listen to me. Izuku's voice was sharp, cutting through the guard's panic. That thing! Its left hind leg is weak. It has an old injury. The guard stared at him, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. What are you talking about? Kid, we need to run. There's no time. Izuku pointed a shaking finger at the monster, which was now only a few meters from the crying child. The guild hunters won't make it. You have to stop it. Me? I am not a hunter. That thing will tear me apart. Its scales are thick on its head and back. A spear won't penetrate. Izuku's words were coming out in a torrent, the pages of his mental notebook flipping at lightning speed. Don't aim for the head. You have to make it put weight on its bad leg. Distract it. From the front. When it lunges, it will have to plant that leg for support. That's your chance. Aim for the joint, just below the knee. A hard strike will shatter it. The sheer, unwavering certainty in Izuku's voice seemed to cut through the guard's terror. He looked from Izuku's blazing emerald eyes to the monster, then to the helpless child. He swallowed hard, his knuckles turning white on the shaft of his spear. Are you sure? The guard asked, his voice a desperate whisper. I'm positive. It was a lie. He wasn't positive. He was trusting a single line in a forgotten field report. 100 things could have been wrong. The report could be inaccurate. The injury could have healed, but in that moment, he believed it with every fiber of his being. That belief was contagious. The young guard took a deep, shuddering breath, a flicker of resolve hardening his face. He gave Izuku a sharp nod. Okay. Okay. He gripped his spear and shield and broke cover, shouting a war cry that was more fear than fury. Hey, you ugly beast! Over here! The Jabra's head snapped around, its attention diverted from the child. It hissed, its frills flaring in agitation as it saw the new challenger. It took a step forward, and Izuku saw it again, the slight hesitation, the careful placement of its left hind leg. It's real. The injury is real. The guard, following Izuku's frantic instructions, didn't charge blindly. He held his ground, banging his spear against his shield. The loud, rhythmic clang echoed in the market, an aggressive challenge. The Jagras, enraged, took the bait. It crouched low and then launched itself forward, a blur of yellow-green scales and snapping teeth. Now! Izuku screamed, his voice raw. When it lands, just as the monster's front claws were about to hit the guard's shield, its back legs planted on the ground for the final push. The injured left leg took the full force of its momentum. The guard, adrenaline coursing through him, didn't try to block. He sidestepped, letting the monster's charge carry it past him, and thrust his spear downwards with all his might, just as Izuku had directed. There was a sickening crack that was louder than the clang of metal. Not the sound of a spear glancing off scales, but the sound of bone giving way. The Jagras let out a piercing shriek of agony. Its left leg buckled completely, folding at an unnatural angle. It tumbled to the ground in a heap, screeching and snapping its jaws wildly. Its charge was broken, its mobility was gone. The lead guild hunter, now recovered, saw the opening. Now! All together, the 3 able-bodied hunters descended on the crippled beast. Their lances punched through its softer underbelly, and with a final, shuddering gasp, the scrap-tailed Jagras lay still. Silence descended upon the market, thick and heavy, broken only by the whimpering of the little girl, who was now being scooped up by her weeping mother. The battle had lasted less than a minute. Izuku stood frozen, his body trembling, the adrenaline draining away to leave a hollow, buzzing exhaustion. His lungs burned. He had done it. He hadn't thrown a punch, hadn't wielded a weapon, but he had faced a monster. And he had won. A small, shaky smile touched his lips. The citizens were slowly emerging from their hiding places, their faces a mixture of relief and awe. They weren't looking at the guild hunters who had delivered the final blow. They were looking at the pale, trembling city guard, and at the small, green-haired boy standing beside him, clutching a worn-out notebook to his chest. From the edge of the crowd, hidden in the long shadow of a market awning, a man watched. He was impossibly gaunt, his frame so skeletal that his drab, oversized coat seemed to hang on nothing but air. His cheeks were hollow, his blonde hair hung in two thin, listless bangs, and his eyes were sunk deep in shadowed sockets. To any passerby, he would have looked like a man wasting away from a terrible illness, but his eyes were not sick. They were sharp, a piercing blue that missed nothing. Toshinori Yagi had not come to the market for groceries. He walked these lower rings sometimes, a ghost in his own city, remembering a time when his presence alone could have stopped the panic before it began. He had seen countless hunts, witnessed the feats of the strongest, bravest hunters the guild had ever produced. He had seen men and women of immense power, prodigies who could slay a rat halos before their 20th birthday. He had seen brute force, elegant skill, and reckless courage. But he had never, in all his years, seen anything quite like what he had just witnessed. He hadn't watched the monster, or the guild hunters. He had watched the boy. He saw the initial, paralyzing fear. He saw the moment that fear was eclipsed by a fierce, desperate need to help. He saw the boy's eyes, not wide with terror, but narrowed in intense, rapid analysis. He saw him recall a piece of information that no one else would have even bothered to remember. Strength could break a monster's hide. Courage could face its charge. But what Toshinori had just seen was different. It was a mind used as a weapon. A heart used as a shield. The boy had weaponized knowledge, directed strategy under extreme duress, and trusted his analysis with a life on the line. He hadn't just helped slay a monster. He had controlled the battlefield with nothing but information and willpower. Toshinori had a secret. A wound that was more than just a horrific, starburst-shaped scar hidden beneath his coat. It was a wound on his soul, a creeping despair that the world was producing stronger monsters, but not smarter hunters. His nemesis, the architect of his pain, had not been a creature of pure instinct. It had been intelligent, cunning, unnatural. It had outthought him. For years, he had searched for a successor. Not just someone to inherit his legacy, but someone who could carry the spirit of a true hunter, the unwavering will to protect others, into a new age. He had looked among the strong, the gifted, the prodigies. He had found none with the right spark. But here, in a terrified, physically unremarkable boy who saved the day with a whispered instruction, Toshinori felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. As the guild hunters secured the area and the young guard was being hailed as a hero, Izuku Midoriya simply stood there, catching his breath, his mind replaying the event, already cataloging it, analyzing his own performance, noting down his fear, his hesitation, and the exhilarating, terrifying moment his plan had actually worked. He didn't notice the gaunt, skeletal man in the shadows, whose piercing blue eyes were fixed on him, seeing not a useless Deku, but the faint, promising embers of a legend waiting for a spark. The aftermath of the breach was a strange symphony of noise. The cries of the injured had been replaced by the efficient, clipped orders of the guild officials. The panic screams had subsided into a low murmur of awestruck whispers and excited retellings. The young city guard, whose name was apparently Kenji, was surrounded, being clapped on the back and hailed as a hero. He kept glancing over at Izuku, his expression a bewildered mix of gratitude and confusion. Izuku didn't want any of it. The attention was a physical weight, pressing down on him, making his skin prickle with anxiety. He had deflected the questions, mumbled his way out of the praise, and slipped away from the scene as soon as he could. He wasn't a hero. He was just a boy with a notebook who had gotten lucky. The thought sent a cold shiver down his spine. What if he'd been wrong? What if the report was old, the injury healed? That guard, that little girl, they would be dead because of his arrogance. The realization was a nauseating lurch in his gut. He found refuge on a stone bench in a small, forgotten plaza tucked away in a recess of the Great Wall. From here, he could see the sun beginning to set, painting the underside of the perpetual smog haze in strokes of orange and violet. The distant thrum of the city was a comforting drone. Here, he was anonymous again. He was just Izuku, the guild librarian, the boy who dreamed too big. He pulled out Monster Analysis for the Future, Volume 13 and a pen, his hands still trembling slightly. He needed to document this. Not the victory, but the variables. Incident report, Lower Market Ring, Gate 7. Single scrap-tail jagras, male. Confirmed prior injury to left fibula as per Field Report 734B. Strategy of exploiting a known weakness was successful. However, success was highly contingent. Relied on 1. The accuracy of a low-priority report. 2. The compliance of an untrained guard. 3. The monster's predictable predatory response. Too many variables, too much risk. A single miscalculation would have resulted in casualties. He couldn't bring himself to write the word death. He stared at the page, the intricate drawing of the jogger's leg seeming to mock him. His strategy had worked, but it felt less like a stroke of genius and more like a desperate gamble that had miraculously paid off. That's a fine piece of analysis, young man. The voice was quiet, raspy, and so close it made Izuku jump, nearly dropping his notebook. He twisted around to see a man standing behind the bench, a man he hadn't even heard approach. He was a scarecrow, a living skeleton draped in a ridiculously oversized tan coat. His face was a landscape of sharp angles and deep shadows, his eyes sunk so far into his skull they seemed to be staring out from another world. A pair of limp, blonde bangs framed his gaunt features. Izuku recognized him vaguely as one of the countless faces that drifted through the city's lower districts, another soul worn down by the harshness of their world. I am sorry, Izuku stammered, clutching his notebook to his chest. I didn't see you there. My apologies for startling you, the man said, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. He gestured a long, bony finger towards the notebook. May I? Izuku hesitated. His notebooks were his most private possessions, more intimate than a diary. But there was a strange intensity in the man's sunken blue eyes, a command that was hard to refuse. He hesitantly offered the open book. The man took it with a surprising gentleness. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the page, taking in the detailed sketches, the color-coded notes, the frantic scrawl of Izuku's theories. He was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You identified the injury from a field report, the man stated, not a question but a confirmation. Report 734B, filed by Hunter Kido. You deduced its tactical significance, and related to someone who could act on it. You controlled the engagement without ever taking a step towards the beast. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. How did you, were you there? I was, the man confirmed, handing the notebook back. I saw everything. I saw your fear. And I saw what you did with it. He gave a small, wheezing cough, turning his head and covering his mouth with a handkerchief. When he pulled it away, Izuku saw a dark stain of red blossom on the white cloth. Alarm bells went off in Izuku's head. Sir, are you all right? You should see a guild medic. I am as I am, the man said, dismissing the concern with a wave of his hand. He fixed his piercing gaze on Izuku once more. Tell me, young man. Why do you want to be a hunter? The question was abrupt, but Izuku had answered it in his own heart 1,000,000 times. The words came out, quiet but firm. I want to save people. When I was a kid, I saw a broadcast of a hunt. A great baggy was cornered in a mining settlement. It was chaos. But then, he arrived. He was so strong, so fearless. And he was smiling. Even with this giant, terrifying monster in front of him, he was smiling, and I knew everything was going to be okay. I want to be a symbol like that. A hunter who can make people feel safe just by being there. The man's expression softened, a flicker of some deep, ancient sadness in his eyes. A symbol, he murmured, the word tasting like a memory. He sighed, a long, rattling sound. A noble dream, but you failed the guild's physical aptitude test. Your scores were, historically low. The words were a physical blow. Izuku flinched, curling in on himself. I know, he whispered, his voice thick with shame. I'm weak. I can't even lift a training sword properly. Everyone says I'm useless, that I should just give up. His eyes burned with unshed tears. But I have to try. Yes, the man said, his voice suddenly hard as iron. You do. Because everyone else is wrong. Izuku looked up, startled. What? In that market, the guild hunters had strength. The city guard had courage. But you, the man said, leaning forward slightly, his intensity making the air crackle. You had a weapon no one else there possessed. You had a mind forged for this world. In a battle against a force of nature, you found a flaw, a single, exploitable detail buried in a mountain of forgotten paperwork, and you turned it into the key to victory. That is not weakness, young man. That is the strength of a different, and perhaps rarer kind. Izuku stared, speechless. No one had ever spoken about his obsessive analysis like that. They called it a strange hobby, a useless fixation. They never called it a strength. Who are you? Izuku finally managed to ask. The man gave a weary, self-deprecating smile. He reached into his coat and pulled out a battered, laminated card. It was an old model guild card, its edges frayed, the photo faded almost to white, but the name, printed in bold, official lettering, was still legible. Yagi Tashinori, rank first star. Izuku's world tilted on its axis. His blood ran cold, then hot. His breath caught in his throat. Yagi Tashinori. It couldn't be. That was a name from the history books, a name whispered in the same breath as the guild's founders. The legendary first star hunter. The symbol of strength. The man they called All Might. No. Izuku breathed, his eyes darting from the skeletal face to the card and back again. It's impossible. All Might, he looked. As if on cue, the man seemed to change. He stood up straighter, his shoulders broadening. For a fleeting, impossible second, a phantom image seemed to overlay his gaunt frame, a titan of a man with a booming laugh and a smile that could hold back the darkness. Then, just as quickly it was gone, and he sagged back into himself, a plume of steam escaping his lips like a dying breath. That form is a memory now, Tashinori said, his voice laced with pain. Just a parlor trick I can barely hold for a few seconds. This, he gestured to his emaciated body, is what I am. Izuku felt like his brain had short-circuited. He was standing in front of his childhood hero, the living legend who had inspired his entire life, and that hero was a broken, dying man. What happened to you? He whispered, his voice filled with a horrified awe. Tashinori's gaze became distant. 5 years ago, he began, his voice low and heavy. I was on a hunt in the uncharted territories. An S-rank classification. A monster of unknown origin. It wasn't like anything I had ever faced. It wasn't just strong. It was intelligent. Malicious. He paused, and with a grimace of pain, he unbuttoned his coat and pulled aside his shirt. Izuku gasped. It wasn't a scar. A scar is a line, a mark of a wound that has healed. This was a crater. A catastrophic absence of flesh. Covering the entire left side of his torso was a swirling vortex of ruined tissue, a starburst pattern of puckered, discolored skin that converged on a deep, hollow cavity just below his ribs. It looked as if something had exploded from within him. It was a wound that screamed of unnatural power, not the clean slash of a claw or the puncture of a fang, but a blast zone, a point of impact from something utterly alien. The fight, it cost me, Tashinori said, his voice strained as he covered the horrific injury. Half of my respiratory system was destroyed. My entire stomach was removed. I can only perform my duties as a hunter for maybe 3 hours a day, and even that is pushing my limits. The symbol of strength is running on fumes. Izuku couldn't speak. He could only stare, his mind reeling from the revelation. The invincible All Might, the smiling hero, was this frail, wounded man. The monster that did this to me, Tashinori continued, his eyes hardening, was not a product of nature. It was crafted, engineered. It was a perversion, and I believe the one who created it is still out there, making more. The threats we face are evolving, young Midoriya. They are becoming smarter, more cunning, and the guild's answer is to simply train hunters to be stronger, to swing their weapons harder. Brute force against brute force. It is an arms race we will eventually lose. He leaned forward again, his gaze locking with Izuku's. That is why I came to you. Raw power isn't enough anymore. The future of hunting, the future of humanity's survival, lies in what you did today. It lies in minds that can see the whole battlefield, that can find the single thread that will unravel the entire tapestry of a monster's strength. It lies in strategy, in preparation, in knowledge. Toshinori Yagi, the legendary All Might, looked at Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless, powerless analyst. I cannot offer you my strength, young man, he said, his voice resonating with a depth that defied his frail appearance. My time is over. But I can offer you my knowledge, my experience. I can help you forge your body into a weapon worthy of your mind. I can train you. He held out his hand. Let me help you become the hunter you were meant to be. The world fell away. The sounds of the city, the setting sun, the cool evening air, it was all gone. There was only the weight of his hero's gaze, the impossible offer hanging in the air between them. It was everything he had ever dreamed of, a fantasy so wild he had never even dared to write it down. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes, hot and unstoppable. They streamed down his cheeks, dripping onto the pages of his notebook. This whole time, he had believed he needed power to be a hero. He thought his mind was just a consolation prize for a body that had failed him. But All Might, his hero, was telling him his mind was the power. Can I? Izuku's voice was a choked, hiccuping sob. Can even I become a hero? Toshinori's gaunt face broke into a small, gentle smile. It wasn't the beaming, confident smile from the old broadcasts, but something softer, more genuine. Young man, he said, his voice full of a conviction that washed over Izuku like a tidal wave. You already are. A few days later, Toshinori led Izuku to the place where his new life would begin, the guild's grand hall. It was late, the hall mostly empty save for a few cleaning staff and a lone hunter sleeping off a celebratory feast at a corner table. Izuku had always felt small and insignificant here, a mouse scurrying in a hall of giants. But walking beside Toshinori, even this diminished version of him felt different. They walked past the bustling canteen and the quest board, heading towards the back of the hall where the most revered artifacts were displayed. There, on a massive pedestal of black obsidian, rested a weapon. It was a great sword, but calling it that was an understatement. It was a monument of scarred, beaten steel, wider than Izuku's chest and taller than a grown man. The blade was chipped and notched, a road map of 1,000 desperate battles. Faint, intricate carvings, almost completely worn away, hinted at a master smith's touch long ago. This was not a pristine, ceremonial blade. It was a tool, a shield, a legacy forged in blood and fury. Izuku breathed, his eyes wide with awe. The wyvern's jaw. All Might's legendary great sword. A bit of a dramatic name, isn't it? Toshinori said with a wry chuckle. I always preferred the name my master gave it. She called it One for All. Izuku looked at him, confused. One for all? Yes, Toshinori said, his gaze fixed on the colossal blade. He reached out and gently ran a finger along one of its deeper scars. This sword, it is just a piece of metal, young Midoriya, a very heavy, very sharp piece of metal that I can no longer lift. The legend is not in the steel. It's in the will behind it. The name is a promise, a philosophy passed from one hunter to another, the will of one hunter, fighting with all their might for all people. A symbol of selfless protection. He turned to face Izuku, his expression solemn. My master, Nana Shimura, passed that will to me. She taught me that true strength isn't about the size of the monster you can kill, but about the number of people you can save. I carried that will into every hunt. Now, I am passing it to you. He wasn't offering Izuku the sword. Izuku understood that now. He couldn't lift it any more than Toshinori could. He was being entrusted with its soul. The weight of that responsibility was far heavier than any lump of steel. I accept, Izuku said, his voice steady, his eyes shining with tears and determination. He bowed deeply. I won't let you down, All Might Sensei. Toshinori smiled. I know you won't. Now then, his tone shifted, becoming brisk and businesslike. The forging begins tomorrow. At dawn. In the training arena. Do not be late. Dawn was a cruel mistress. The air in the outdoor training arena was cold and sharp, biting at Izuku's exposed skin. He was dressed in the most basic training clothes, thin and worn. His muscles, unaccustomed to anything more strenuous than carrying books, were already protesting. Toshinori was relentless. He had crafted a training plan so grueling it felt like a punishment. Izuku's days became a blur of controlled agony. He ran laps around the entire circumference of Mizurufu's inner wall until his lungs felt like they were on fire. He did push-ups and sit-ups until his arms and abdomen were screaming bundles of shredded muscle. He dragged weighted sleds across the arena's dirt floor, his legs trembling with exhaustion. Every evening, he would collapse onto his bed, his body a symphony of aches. But every morning, before the sun had even begun to touch the top of the Great Wall, he would be back in the arena, ready for more. Toshinori was always there, watching, correcting his form, pushing him to go 1 second longer, to lift 1 more kilogram. A hunter's body is his first and most important piece of equipment. Toshinori would bark, his voice regaining some of its old command. It must be durable. It must be reliable. Your mind can craft the perfect strategy, but if your body fails you at the critical moment, you are dead. After weeks of this brutal physical conditioning, when Izuku could finally run the wall circuit without collapsing, Toshinori led him to the arena's armory. Racks upon racks of weapons lined the walls. The 14 iconic types of the Hunter's Guild: the colossal great sword, the nimble long sword, the defensive lance and the explosive gun lance, the punishing hammer and the melodic hunting horn, the versatile sword and shield and the relentless dual blades. Each one was a different philosophy of combat. A hunter's weapon is an extension of his soul, Toshinori explained. You must find the one that speaks to you. Not the one you think is strongest, but the one that best complements your own nature. Try them. Izuku tried. He picked up a great sword and immediately buckled under its weight, falling to his knees. He tried the long sword, but its graceful, flowing movements felt awkward and alien to him. The hammer was a non-starter. He was too timid for the hyper-aggressive dual blades, his movements jerky and uncertain. He felt a familiar despair creeping in. He was still too weak. Do not think about what you lack, Toshinori advised, seeing the frustration on his student's face. Think about what you have. You are not a creature of overwhelming force. You are a creature of timing, of precision, of exploiting openings. Your weapon should reflect that. Izuku's eyes scanned the racks again, passing over the more famous weapons. His gaze landed on one he had only ever read about in technical manuals. It looked complicated. It had a long haft like an axe, but its head was a complex assembly of gears and moving parts. He picked it up. It was heavy, but the weight was balanced. It felt manageable. The switch axe, Toshinori noted, a flicker of approval in his eyes. A complex choice. A weapon of transformation and commitment. Izuku examined it. As an axe, it had long reach, good for keeping a monster at a distance while he observed its patterns. But then he found the mechanism. With a practiced click, a motion he had memorized from diagrams, he triggered the transformation. The axe head folded in on itself, the haft retracted, and a long, powerful blade extended from the core with a satisfying shink. It was now a sword, shorter in reach but faster, more powerful. Axe mode for mobility and reach, Izuku muttered, his analyst's brain kicking in. Sword mode for focus damage during an opening. It has a file system, charges in axe mode, discharges in sword mode for extra elemental or status effects, and then there's the elemental discharge. He had studied it. A high-risk, high-reward move where the hunter latched onto a monster and unleashed the file's entire energy in a massive, point-blank explosion. It left the user completely vulnerable, but if it landed on a weak spot at the right time, it could change the course of a fight. It was a strategist's weapon. It wasn't about overpowering the monster. It was about outthinking it. It was about building resources, creating an opening, and then committing everything to a single, decisive, perfectly timed strike. This one, Izuku said, his voice filled with a newfound confidence. He looked up at his mentor, his eyes bright. I choose this one. Toshinori's gaunt face broke into a wide, proud smile. An excellent choice, my boy. A weapon that rewards a sharp mind, And so, the second phase of his training began. Izuku spent his days learning the intricate dance of the switch axe. The fluid morph attacks that let him switch from axe to sword in the middle of a combo. The timing of the sidestep in axe mode, the forward hop in sword mode. He practiced on training dummies, his movements clumsy at first, then slowly becoming more fluid, more confident. He was still Izuku Midoriya. He was still physically weaker than every other aspirant in the guild. But now, bruised, exhausted, and covered in grime from the training yard, he felt a spark of something new. He would fall, over and over, his muscles screaming, his body failing him. But each time, he would get back up. One evening, as the last light faded from the sky, he finally executed the full elemental discharge combo perfectly. He latched onto the dummy, the file on his axe glowing with stored energy, and unleashed the blast. The dummy shuddered on its post, a deep scorch mark appearing on its leather hide. Izuku was thrown back by the recoil, landing hard on the dirt, but he scrambled back to his feet, panting, a triumphant, weary grin on his face. From the sidelines, Toshinori Yagi watched. He saw the sweat and the grime, the bruises and the scrapes. But he also saw the unshakable resolve in his student's emerald eyes. He saw a boy who had been told he was worthless his whole life, now forging himself, piece by agonizing piece, into a weapon. The embers were glowing. Soon, they would be ready to catch fire. The day Izuku Midoriya received his hunter's license was the proudest and most terrifying day of his life. It wasn't a grand ceremony. There was no fanfare. It was a sterile, sweat-soaked affair in Training Arena 4, with the hulking form of a decommissioned training automaton, nicknamed the Basarios, looming over him. The final practical exam was simple: survive for 5 minutes. The automaton, a heavily armored quadrupedal machine, was programmed to simulate the attack patterns of a low-tier wyvern. It didn't hit with the force of a real monster, but its charges were relentless. Its simulated fireballs were bursts of pressurized steam hot enough to scald, and its movements were jarringly unpredictable. For 4 minutes and 45 seconds, Izuku was a blur of desperate motion. He wasn't fighting it, he was merely existing in its presence. His muscles, honed by Toshinori's brutal regimen, screamed in protest. His switch axe, the proto-axe, felt like a lead weight in his hands. He couldn't land a single clean hit. All his energy was spent on dodging, rolling, and diving out of the way of the machine's relentless assault. The guild instructors watching from the observation deck looked on with grim, unimpressed expressions. With 15 seconds left, he stumbled. His foot caught on an uneven patch of dirt, and he went down hard. The automaton's optical sensors glowed red as it locked onto the stationary target. It lowered its head, pneumatic pistons hissing as it prepared for a final, test-ending charge. Panic seized him, cold and absolute. His body wouldn't respond. This was it. He was going to fail. He was going to disappoint All Might. But then, through the haze of fear, his analytical mind, his one true weapon, fired a single, life-saving shot. He had spent hours studying the schematics of this very machine in the guild archives. Internal coolant system, Series 7. Prone to overheating in the primary leg actuators after prolonged exertion. A system shock to the left foreleg joint can trigger an emergency system reset. He didn't have time to get up and swing. But he could roll. With a desperate grunt, he threw his body to the side, his axe clattering on the ground. He rolled directly into the path of the charge, a move that made one of the instructors gasp. But he wasn't aiming for the machine's head or chest. As the massive metal leg came down, he thrust his armored gauntlet forward, slamming his fist into the complex joint mechanism with every ounce of his remaining strength. The impact was jarring, sending a shockwave up his arm. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, with a loud clank and a hiss of venting steam, the automaton froze mid-stride. A single red light on its chassis blinked before the entire machine powered down. The timer buzzed, signaling the end of the test. Silence. Izuku lay on the dirt, chest heaving, his arm throbbing. He had survived. He had passed. He hadn't won through strength, but through knowledge. A small, shaky smile touched his lips. Midoriya, one of the instructors called down, his voice flat and devoid of praise. Your physical performance was abysmal. Your offensive capability is non-existent. You passed on a technicality. Barely. He made a note on his clipboard. Report to the registry for your license. Don't expect to last long. The words stung, but they couldn't completely extinguish the tiny flame of pride in his chest. He had done it. From the shadows of the viewing gallery, a gaunt Tashinori gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. That was all the validation Izuku needed. His official hunter's license was a simple plasteel card, cool and solid in his hand. It felt heavier than a great sword. On it was his slightly too serious photo, his name, and his rank, Hunter, Grade 1. He was no longer an apprentice, no longer just a librarian. He was a hunter. The next morning, he stood before the massive quest board in the guild's grand hall, his heart thrumming with a nervous energy. The board was a chaotic collage of parchment and paper, detailing everything from simple mushroom-gathering quests to urgent 5-star warnings about rampaging wyverns. Seasoned hunters gathered around it, casually discussing the merits of tackling a Plesioth versus an Argakuga, their voices a low rumble of experience. Izuku felt like a child in a land of giants. He scanned the low-rank section, his eyes searching for the perfect first quest. Herb delivery, perhaps? Or maybe slay 5 small jaggy. Something simple. Something safe. Something he could manage on his own, to prove to himself that he could do this. Midoriya Izuku. The voice was dry and bored, coming from the quest counter. A man with tired, bloodshot eyes and long, black hair looked up from a stack of paperwork. His name tag read Sachikawa. He was one of the guild's many logistics coordinators, the unsung bureaucrats who kept the entire monster hunting machine running. Why yes, sir? Izuku stammered, hurrying over. Sachikawa slid a quest permit across the counter. Your first assignment. Urgent culling request. Velocidrome, Old Forest Sector 3. It's been harassing supply caravans. Izuku's eyes went wide. A velocidrome. Not the most dangerous of monsters, but a formidable predator nonetheless. A bird wyvern, fast as lightning, with a razor-sharp beak and sickle-like claws. They hunted in packs, led by a larger, more aggressive alpha. It was a world away from a mushroom run. Alone? He squeaked. Sachikawa gave a long-suffering sigh. No. The system has assigned you a partner. He tapped a name on the permit. Standard protocol for new hunters with unusual aptitude profiles. He looked at Izuku's file, then at another one next to it. The algorithm flagged this pairing for tactical synergy. High strategic potential paired with high offensive output. Izuku leaned forward to read the name, and his blood ran cold. Bakugo, Katsuki. Oh no, he whispered. Something wrong? Sachikawa asked without a hint of actual interest. Hey! DKU! A roar from across the hall made several hunters jump. Stomping towards the counter was a young man with a shock of spiky ash-blonde hair and a perpetual scowl etched onto his face. His armor was already a custom job, forged from the crimson plating of an Arzuros, and strapped to his back was a brutal-looking gunlance, its metal barrel still gleaming with fresh oil. This was Katsuki Bakugo, the guild's prodigy, the rookie who had set new records in every physical test he'd ever taken. And Izuku's childhood tormentor. Bakugo slammed his hand on the counter, his red eyes blazing with fury. He snatched the permit, read the names, and crumpled it slightly in his fist. You've got to be kidding me, he snarled, not at the clerk, but at Izuku. My first official solo-cleared hunt, and they're saddling me with you? What are you supposed to do, annoy the monster to death with your creepy muttering? Izuku shrank back. Keikaken, the guild assigned us. Don't call me that. Bakugo jabbed a finger at Izuku's chest. Listen to me, and listen good, you useless notebook nerd. I'm running this hunt. You are going to stay out of my way. If you see a monster, you hide behind a rock. If you get in my line of fire, I am not responsible for what happens. Your only job is to not die and make me fail the quest. Got it? Without waiting for an answer, he snatched the permit back, had Sachikawa stamp it with a thunderous thump, and stormed off towards the main gate. Supply camp in 30 minutes. If you're late, I'm leaving you behind. Izuku was left trembling, his brief moment of pride shattered into a million pieces. Tsuchikawa just shrugged and went back to his paperwork. This was going to be a disaster. 30 minutes later, Izuku stood in the supply camp at the edge of the old forest, his new armor, a standard-issue set of leather and bone, feeling flimsy and inadequate. The air here was different, thick with the smell of damp earth, rotting leaves, and the subtle, primal scent of the wilds. The familiar, comforting hum of the city was gone, replaced by the chirping of insects and the distant cry of an unknown creature. Bakugo was already there, meticulously loading shells into his gun lance, his movements sharp and efficient. He ignored Izuku completely. Swallowing his fear, Izuku approached, pulling a carefully hand-drawn map from his satchel. This was his territory. He could still salvage this. He could still be useful. Keikaken, he began, spreading the map on a wooden crate. I've analyzed the request and the terrain. The Velocidrome and its pack were last seen in Area 5, near the river. My proposal is to approach from the north, through Area 2. There's a natural choke point here, he pointed with a slightly shaky finger, a narrow ravine. We can set a pitfall trap there. I'll act as bait, lure the Velocipede pack into the ravine. Once they're trapped, you can dispatch them easily with your gunlance wide-range shelling. That will isolate the Velocidrome. He was warming to his subject now, his voice gaining confidence. The Alpha will be enraged, but predictable. It will charge my position. You'll be hidden on the ridge above. As it passes beneath you, you can execute a jumping strike, aiming for the back of its neck, a known weak point. A successful mount will give us the opening we need to break its crest and finish it off. It's an efficient, low-risk plan that minimizes direct engagement with the pack. He looked up, expecting, well, he wasn't sure what he was expecting. Grudging acceptance, maybe? A nod? Bakugo hadn't even looked at the map. He was staring at Izuku with an expression of profound disbelief. He let out a short, harsh laugh. A plan, he said, the word dripping with scorn. You spent all night coming up with that little story, didn't you, Deku? It's a sound strategy. Izuku protested. It's based on established hunting manuals. Here's my plan, Bakugo interrupted, slamming a fresh shell into the gunlance chamber with a loud click-clack. I walk in there. I find the biggest, ugliest raptor with the stupidest-looking feather on its head. And then, he hefted the massive weapon onto his shoulder, a predatory grin spreading across his face. I blow it to hell. End of plan. He turned and started walking towards the forest entrance. Now are you coming, or are you going to stand there and play with your crayons? Dejected, Izuku rolled up his map and followed, his perfect, textbook strategy already feeling like a foolish dream. The old forest was a place of breathtaking, terrifying beauty. Giant, moss-covered trees formed a canopy so thick that the sunlight only pierced through in dappled, shifting columns. Strange, bioluminescent fungi cast an eerie blue glow in the deeper shadows. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of anxiety through Izuku. His senses were on high alert, his mind cataloging everything, the tracks on the ground, the scrape marks on the trees, the direction of the wind. Bakugo, in contrast, crashed through the undergrowth like a charging bullfango. He wasn't tracking, he was hunting, pushing forward with an aggressive momentum that seemed to dare the forest to throw something at him. They were in Area 3 when Izuku spotted them. He held up a hand, a silent signal for Bakugo to stop. Wait. Up ahead, through the dense ferns, he could see them. A pack of 5 Velocipede, smaller than their alpha, but still dangerous. They were sleek, blue-scaled predators with vibrant red claws, nervously sniffing the air, their heads bobbing up and down. They hadn't spotted them yet. This was it. His plan was ruined, but he could still be the strategist. Okay, he whispered, his mind racing. They're grouped together. If you use a wormstake shot now, you could probably take out 2 or 3 before they scatter. I can draw the others away and... He never got to finish. Rayawag. With a guttural roar that was more beast than man, Bakugo burst from the ferns. He didn't wait, he didn't plan, he charged. The Velocipede shrieked in alarm, their heads snapping up. One of them lunged forward, and Bakugo met it head-on, his massive shield deflecting its pounce with a deafening clang. Without missing a beat, he thrust his gun lance forward, the lance tip punching clean through the creature's scaly hide. He fired a point-blank shell, and the monster was thrown backwards in a shower of gore. It was brutal. It was messy. And it was terrifyingly effective, but it was also loud. The sound of the blast echoed through the forest like a thunderclap. From deeper within the trees, an answering call came, a sharp, piercing cry that was higher and more commanding than the others. "Kaken, you fool!" Izuku hissed. "You've alerted the Alpha. My plan was to isolate it. This is better." Bakugo yelled back, a manic grin on his face as another Velocipede leaped at him. "Now they're all coming to me. Saves me the trouble of looking for him." Chaos erupted. The remaining Velocipede swarmed him. Bakugo was a whirlwind of steel and explosions. He blocked with his shield, stabbed with his lance, and fired shells that sent the raptors flying. But he was surrounded. A claw raked across his back, leaving a deep scratch in his crimson armor. Another snapped at his leg, forcing him to stumble. Izuku watched, frozen at the edge of the clearing. His brain was screaming at him. Help him! Create a diversion. Use a flash bomb. Throw a sonic bomb. Do something. He fumbled in his pouch for a flash bomb, his fingers clumsy and numb. He had to time it right. He had to throw it so it wouldn't blind Bakugo. He had to. From the corner of his eye, a blur of blue and red. He had been so focused on Bakugo, he hadn't kept track of all the monsters. One of the Velocipede had broken off from the main fight. And it was charging straight at him. Everything he had learned, every minute of training with Tashinori, every page of his notebooks, it all evaporated in a white-hot flash of pure, primal terror. The world narrowed to a single point of focus, the monster's sickle-like claw, raised to strike. Its reptilian eyes cold and merciless. Its open maw, a gallery of needle-sharp teeth, screeching as it closed the distance. Izuku's mind went utterly, terrifyingly blank. He didn't dodge. He didn't block. He didn't even raise his weapon. He just stood there, paralyzed, a pathetic statue of fear, his knuckles white on the grip of his switch axe. He could feel the monster's hot breath on his face. He was going to die. On his very first hunt, he was going to die. Boom! A concussive blast threw him off his feet. He landed hard, the wind knocked out of him. He looked up, dazed, his ears ringing. The Velocipede that had been about to kill him was gone, replaced by a smoking crater in the earth. Standing over him was Bakugo, the barrel of his gun lance still smoking. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He wasn't looking at the dead monster. He was glaring down at Izuku. "I told you," Bakugo seethed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I told you to stay out of the way." Before Izuku could respond, a massive shadow fell over them. Towering over the ferns at the edge of the clearing was the Velociraptor. It was nearly twice the size of its pack mates, its scales a deeper, more vibrant blue, and a magnificent, blood-red crest crowned its head. It took in the scene, its dead pack, the two hunters, and let out a piercing shriek of fury that vibrated in Izuku's bones. Bakugo grinned, all his anger momentarily forgotten and redirected. Finally, the main event. He turned his back on Izuku, planting his feet and raising his shield just as the Velociraptor charged. The impact was like a battering ram hitting a stone wall. Bakugo grunted, his boots digging trenches in the soft earth as he absorbed the blow. The fight was nothing like the elegant, strategic ballet Izuku had envisioned. It was a brawl. A messy, desperate, and incredibly violent struggle for dominance. The Velociraptor was impossibly fast, a blur of motion, leaping and slashing, trying to flank Bakugo's shield. Bakugo was a fortress, blocking the vicious attacks and retaliating with powerful, if clumsy, swings of his gun lance. Izuku, still on the ground, could only watch. He felt a wave of shame so profound it was physically painful. He had frozen. A real hunter would have gotten up, rejoined the fight. But he couldn't move. His limbs felt like lead. He was useless. Deku. The name echoed in his mind, a final, damning judgment. Bakugo was taking a beating. The Velociraptor was relentless. It leaped onto a fallen log, using the height to dive down, claws extended. Bakugo blocked, but the force sent him stumbling back. The monster pressed its advantage, snapping at his exposed side. Bakugo roared in frustration and pain as a claw tore through the leather joint of his armor, drawing blood. Enraged, Bakugo shoved the monster back and began to charge his ultimate attack. The tip of the gunlance began to glow, an angry orange-red, heat visibly distorting the air around it. Wyvern's Fire, a devastating, but incredibly slow attack. He was completely vulnerable while it charged. The Velociraptor saw its chance. It crouched low, ready to spring, to deliver a final, fatal blow. And in that moment, something in Izuku's mind finally clicked back into place. Not courage. Not strength. Just data, Velociraptor crest. Composed of soft, cartilaginous tissue. Highly sensitive. Serves as a display for dominance and a weak point. A significant impact can disorient the creature, inducing a state of temporary paralysis. He wasn't a fighter. He wasn't a hero. But he was a hunter. And a hunter's job was to hunt. Scrambling to his feet, he switched his axe to sword mode. He didn't charge the monster's body. He ran at an angle, towards a low-hanging, mossy branch. Using every ounce of strength in his legs, he jumped, kicked off the trunk of the tree, and launched himself into the air. For a brief, glorious second, he was flying. He brought his blade down in a clumsy, desperate arc, not on the monster's tough, scaly back, but directly on the vibrant red crest. The sword connected with a wet, fleshy thud. The Velociraptor let out a choked, gurgling screech. Its charge faltered. It shook its head violently, its eyes rolling back, completely disoriented. The opening. Now! Izuku screamed, his voice cracking. Bakugo didn't need to be told twice. With a final, triumphant roar, he unleashed the Wyvern's Fire. A torrent of flame and raw concussive force erupted from the gunlance, engulfing the stunned Velociraptor completely. The blast tore through the clearing, scorching the earth and snapping a nearby sapling in two. When the smoke cleared, the alpha monster lay motionless, its magnificent crest shattered, its body riddled with shrapnel. The hunt was over. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the crackle of burning leaves and Bakugo's harsh, ragged breathing. He stood over the monster's corpse, his armor smoking, his arm bleeding freely. Izuku landed heavily, his legs giving out from under him. He had done it. He had helped. A small flicker of hope ignited in his chest. Maybe now, maybe Kaken would see. Bakugo slowly turned to face him. His expression wasn't one of gratitude. It was a thunderous mask of pure, undiluted fury. He stomped over to Izuku, grabbing him by the front of his armor and hauling him to his feet. Did you see that? Bakugo snarled, his face inches from Izuku's. Did you see me almost get my guts torn out? That was your fault. You and your stupid, useless plan. You froze. You just stood there waiting to die. I helped at the end. Izuku choked out. At the end? Bakugo laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. You call that helping? You got lucky. One lucky shot after you spent the entire fight cowering on the ground. You're a liability, Deku, a walking death sentence. He shoved Izuku back, sending him stumbling. All your damn notes, Bakugo spat, his voice dripping with contempt. All your little drawings and theories. They're completely useless when there's a fawn at your throat. This, he gestured to the bloody clearing, the dead monsters, the destruction, is hunting. It's not a textbook problem. It's about guts and power, two things you will never have. He turned his back on Izuku, pulling a large carving knife from his belt. With angry, efficient movements, he began harvesting the valuable parts from the Velociraptor's corpse. The crest, the claws, the hide. He didn't offer to help Izuku carve the lesser monsters. He didn't say another word. When he was done, he slung the monster parts over his shoulder and started the long walk back to camp, leaving Izuku alone in the silent, blood-soaked clearing. The journey back to the guild hall was a quiet, humiliating affair. The quest was officially a success. They had culled the monster, but as he handed in his report, Izuku felt nothing but the crushing weight of failure. He had seen the complaint filed by the Forestry Division about unnecessary environmental damage. He knew it was Bakugo's Wyvern's Fire, but he also knew it never would have been needed if his own plan, or his own courage, hadn't failed. He found Tashinori in their secluded training spot, waiting for him. The old hunter didn't need to ask what had happened. It was written all over Izuku's face. I failed, Izuku said, his voice hollow. He sank to the ground, his body and spirit aching. Kaken was right. I froze. I was useless. All my knowledge, it didn't matter. I'm not cut out to be a hunter. Toshinori listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When Izuku was finished, he sat down beside him. Tell me, young Midoriya, he said, his voice quiet. Did your plan to trap the pack in the ravine fail? Yes, Izuku mumbled. Kaken charged in before I could even set it up. And did your plan to ambush the Alpha from the ridge fail? Yes. The fight happened in the wrong place entirely. So, Toshinori said, your initial strategy was rendered obsolete within the first minute of enemy contact. Is that correct? Yes, Izuku said, misery lacing his voice. And yet, Toshinori continued, at the final, critical moment, when Bakugo was about to be struck down, you identified a weakness, created an opening, and enabled the final blow. You did that without a plan, acting on pure instinct and knowledge. Is that also correct? Izuku looked up, confused. I guess so. A plan is not a scripture, my boy, Toshinori said, placing a reassuringly heavy hand on Izuku's shoulder. It is a starting point. I guess. The battlefield is a chaotic, living thing. It does not care for your carefully drawn maps. A good hunter does not have a perfect plan. A great hunter is the one who can adapt when his perfect plan goes to hell in a handbasket. He looked Izuku in the eye, his gaze firm. You did not fail today. You learned the single most important lesson any hunter can learn. Reality will always punch you in the mouth. What matters is that you get back up, spit out the blood, and punch back with a new plan. The words didn't magically heal the sting of Bakugo's insults, or erase the shame of his fear. But they were a lifeline. A different perspective. He hadn't succeeded, but perhaps he hadn't completely failed either. He had learned. That night, back in his small room, Izuku took out a brand new notebook. Monster Analysis for the Future, Volume 14. He opened it to the first blank page. For a long time, he just stared at it. Then, he began to write. He didn't draw a monster. He didn't list elemental weaknesses. He drew a flowchart. At the top of the page, in neat block letters, he wrote, Plan A, Ideal Scenario. From that box, he drew an arrow to another, labeled, Contingency B, Partner Noncompliance. Below that, he added bullet points, Reckless Charge Protocol. Aggro Management Strategies. How to capitalize on chaotic offense. He drew another arrow from the top box. Contingency C, Environmental Anomaly. Unexpected terrain. Weather interference. Presence of secondary large monster. He kept drawing, his pen flying across the page, his mind alight with a new kind of strategy. He created branches for equipment failure, for unexpected monster behavior, for personal injury. He was building a new kind of plan, a plan for when plans fail. He was analyzing chaos itself, trying to map its patterns, to predict its unpredictable nature. He was still covered in bruises. His heart still ached with the memory of his failure. But as he filled the page with branching paths and backup strategies, he felt a flicker of his old determination return. Bakugo was right. His notes were useless when there was a fong at his throat. So he would have to write better notes. He would have to be a better hunter. He had tasted blood, both the monster's and his own. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was only the beginning. The week following the Velocydrome incident was a quiet hell. Izuku buried himself in the guild archives, the familiar scent of old paper and dust a comforting balm for his bruised ego. He avoided the grand hall, terrified of running into Bakugo, whose thunderous glare he could feel even from across the cavernous room. News of their hunt had spread, twisted by rumor into a tale of Bakugo's singular, explosive prowess, with Izuku as a bumbling, nameless footnote who was lucky to have survived. It stung, but Toshinori's words echoed in his mind, a great hunter is the one who can adapt. He spent his days conditioning, his body protesting but slowly, surely, growing stronger. He spent his evenings not just studying monsters, but studying failure. He read every after-action report that detailed a disastrous hunt, a failed trap, a mission gone wrong. He cross-referenced them, looking for patterns for the single, overlooked variable that caused the entire strategy to collapse. His new notebook, Volume 14, became a testament to Murphy's Law, a bible of everything that could and did go wrong in the field. He was so engrossed in his work that he almost missed the summons. A crisp, official-looking guild runner, a young woman with a no-nonsense expression, found him in his usual dusty corner of the library. "Izuku Midoriya?" she asked, her voice echoing in the silence. "Why, yes?" he stammered, looking up from a complex diagram of Akazu's electrical organs. "New assignment," she said, handing him a sealed scroll. "Briefing in 1 hour. Hall of Assembly, Chamber 3. Don't be late." And with that, she was gone. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. A new assignment. So soon. He half expected it to be a demotion, a permanent assignment to herb-gathering duty in the city's hydroponic farms. With trembling fingers, he broke the wax seal and unrolled the parchment. Urgent request. Threat, coordinated predator pack. Targets, Iapri Iodrome. Location, Sunken Hollow, Sector 7. Objective, eliminate the Alpha Iodrome and cull the pack. Min, 10 Iapri. Special conditions, highly toxic environment. Extreme caution advised. Hunter Team Assignment, M734. Below, 4 names were listed. His was the first. The other 3 sent a fresh wave of anxiety through him. Uraraka, Ochako, Ida, Tenya, Yayorozu, Momo. He knew the names. Everyone did. They were the cream of the crop from his graduating class. Ochako Uraraka was a prodigy with the insect glaive, her aerial agility legendary even among the instructors. Tenya Ida was the scion of the famous Ida hunting dynasty, a family known for producing the most stalwart and unbreachable lance users in the guild's history. And Momo Yayorozu, she was a genius, a master of the bow gun and a peerless field tactician who specialized in crafting specialized ammo and support items on the fly. He was being teamed up with the best and brightest. And him. The technicality. The liability. "This is a mistake," he whispered to the empty library. "They put me on the wrong team." But there was no mistake. An hour later, he stood awkwardly in the designated assembly chamber, a circular stone room designed for pre-hunt briefings. His standard-issue bone armor felt shabby and inadequate next to the gear of his new teammates. Tenya Ida was already there, standing at perfect attention. He was a tall, powerfully built young man, and his custom-made armor, forged from the metallic plating of a Barath, was immaculate. It was a perfect reflection of his personality, rigid, precise, and built for defense. He adjusted his glasses with a sharp, mechanical motion. "Midoriya! You are precisely 4 minutes early." An admirable display of punctuality. A hunter's discipline begins long before the hunt itself, he declared, his voice a booming baritone that was slightly too loud for the room. He chopped the air with his hand for emphasis. Why yes, Ida-kun," Izuku squeaked, intimidated by his sheer intensity. The door slid open again, and Ochako Uraraka bounced in, a bright, cheerful presence that immediately warmed the sterile room. Her armor, crafted from the light, flexible parts of a Pukei, was a vibrant mix of green and pink. The kinsect perched on her arm, a shimmering, dragonfly-like creature, clicked its mandibles curiously. "Hi! You must be Midoriya-kun. I'm Uraraka, nice to meet you," she said with a sunny smile that made Izuku's face flush. "Wow, your analysis of that Jagras breach was amazing. Everyone in the lower city is still talking about it." Before Izuku could stammer out a reply, the final member of their party arrived. Momo Yayorozu entered with a quiet grace and confidence that demanded attention. Her gear was a masterpiece of engineering, a sleek set of Tsutsuyaku armor known for its sensory-enhancing properties. Strapped to her back was a state-of-the-art light bow gun, and her belt was a dizzying array of pouches and canisters, all meticulously organized. "A pleasure to be working with you all," she said, her voice calm and measured. "I have already reviewed the preliminary reports on the target and environment. The high concentration of airborne toxins in the Sunken Hollow will require a steady supply of antidotes. I've taken the liberty of preparing a surplus." She patted one of her many pouches. Izuku felt a familiar wave of inadequacy wash over him. He was surrounded by talent, confidence, and preparation. What could he possibly offer a team like this? He was the weak link, the anchor that would drag them down. The briefing was conducted by a grizzled, one-eyed hunter named Shishido, the guild's foremost expert on poisonous monsters. A holographic map of the sunken hollow shimmered in the center of the room. "All right, listen up, rookies," Shishido growled, tapping the map. "The sunken hollow is a nasty piece of work. It's a network of underground caves and fungal forests. The air is thick with poison spores, and the ground is riddled with toxic pools. Standard issue antidotes will work, but their efficacy will degrade over time. You'll need to keep a close eye on your health." He zoomed in on a large, cavernous area. "This is your target zone. A pack of Iapri, led by a large Iodrome, has nested here. Iapri are more aggressive than their Velocipri cousins, and their bites carry a potent poison. The Iodrome is the real threat. It's larger, tougher, and can spit concentrated globs of toxin that will eat through standard armor. It's a battle of attrition. Your job is to get in, take down the alpha, cull the pack, and get out before the environment wears you down." He looked around the room, his one good eye seeming to linger on Izuku for a moment too long. "Your team composition is unusual. A lancer for defense, a glaive for mobility, a bowgun for support, and—" He paused, looking at Izuku's file, "an analyst with a switch axe. The guild's new algorithm put you together. Says you have a 92% synergistic potential." He snorted. "We'll see. Don't die." Dismissed. As the others began their final gear checks, Izuku felt a familiar knot of panic tighten in his stomach. He was going to hold them back. He was going to get them killed. "Midoriya-kun?" He looked up to see Ochako looking at him, her cheerful expression now tinged with concern. "Are you okay? You look a little pale." "I'm fine," he squeaked, his voice an octave too high. "Just processing the mission parameters." Tenya Ida marched over, his face a mask of stern seriousness. "Midoriya-kun, while I have the utmost respect for the guild's new strategic algorithms, I must confess I am unfamiliar with your combat style. For the sake of team cohesion and operational safety, could you please outline your intended role in this engagement?" It was a fair question, but it felt like an accusation. His role? To try not to get in the way. To not freeze this time. But then he remembered Tashinori. He remembered his new notebook. This wasn't the same situation as the hunt with Bakugo. This was a team that valued strategy, a team that was willing to listen. This was his chance. He took a deep breath, steeling his nerves. "Okay," he said, his voice quiet but steady. He pulled out a fresh map of the sunken hollow, one he'd already covered in annotations and potential routes. He unrolled it on the briefing table. The others gathered around, their expressions curious. "Here's what I'm thinking," he began, his initial nervousness giving way to the familiar comfort of analysis. "Shishido-san is right. This is a battle of attrition. We can't win by charging in. The environment is as much of a threat as the monsters. So, our primary objective shouldn't be to kill the Iodrome as fast as possible, but to control the engagement to minimize our exposure to the poison." He pointed to a series of narrow tunnels on the map. "The Iapri are pack hunters. They'll try to swarm us, surround us, and overwhelm us with poison from multiple angles. We can't let that happen. Ida-kun, your shield is our greatest asset. You are the wall. Your job will be to block off these narrow passages, forcing the pack to approach from a single direction. You'll be the anchor of our formation." Ida's eyes lit up behind his glasses. "A sound defensive strategy. By limiting their avenues of attack, we neutralize their numerical advantage." "I understand." He gave a sharp nod. Izuku turned to Momo. "Yayarosa-san, your bowgun gives us range. While Ida-kun holds the line, you'll be positioned behind him. Your priority is not damage, but status effects. Iapri are susceptible to paralysis. If you can land a few Para-S shots into the approaching pack, you can thin them out and create openings for the rest of us. You'll also be our lifeline, calling out when we need to fall back and use antidotes." Momo considered his words, her expression thoughtful. "A logical division of labor. By focusing on crowd control, I can conserve my more powerful ammunition for the Iodrome itself." "I approve." Finally, he looked at Ochako. Uraraka-san, you and I are the damage dealers. But you're mobile in a way none of us are. While Ida-kun holds them at the choke point, you'll use your insect glaive to stay airborne. Attack from above. The Iapri won't be able to reach you, and you can target their backs, which my journals indicate have thinner scales. You'll be our harasser, our constant, untouchable threat. Ochako's eyes sparkled. Wow! So I get to fly around and bonk them on the head? I love it! And what about you, Midoriya-kun? Ida asked, the question now filled with genuine curiosity rather than suspicion. Izuku took another deep breath. I'll be the vanguard, right beside you. My switch axe has good reach in axe mode. My job is to manage the front line. I'll cripple the Iapri that get too close, aiming for their legs to slow them down. I'll create openings for you to counter-thrust. I'll be the one watching the Idrome's patterns. It's the alpha. It will dictate the flow of the fight. I need to learn its tells, its enrage triggers, its attack windows. I'll be the shot caller. When I see an opening, I'll give the signal for us to switch from defense to a coordinated, all-out attack. He finished, his chest tight, his face flushed. He had laid it all out. His strategy, his role, everything. He braced himself for the rejection, for the laughter. Instead, there was a moment of contemplative silence. It was Ida who spoke first. It is a remarkably well thought out and comprehensive plan, he said, pushing his glasses up his nose. It assigns clear roles to each member, maximizes our individual strengths, and mitigates the environmental hazards. I see no flaws in your logic. Yeah, that was awesome. Ochako chimed in. It's like you can see the whole fight before it even happens. I feel way more confident now. Momo gave a small, approving smile. Your tactical acumen is impressive, Midoriya-san. The emphasis on control over brute force is the correct approach for this encounter. I will adjust my ammo loadout accordingly. Izuku stared at them, his mouth slightly agape. They liked his plan. They trusted him. A warmth spread through his chest, a feeling so foreign and so welcome it almost brought tears to his eyes. This was what it felt like to be part of a team. The air in the sunken hollow was thick and wet, tasting of mildew and something acridly chemical. Towering, phosphorescent mushrooms cast a sickly green and purple glow over the landscape, illuminating pools of bubbling, toxic sludge. The air itself seemed to shimmer with spores, and with every breath, Izuku felt a slight, tingling numbness on his tongue. Status check, he said, his voice hushed, echoing slightly in the cavernous space. Ida, clear, came the crisp reply. Uraraka, all good. Ochako whispered, her kinsect buzzing nervously on her arm. Yayorozu, environment is stable. No immediate threats detected, Momo reported, her eyes scanning the darkness. They moved as a unit, a tight, four-person diamond with Ida at the point and Momo guarding the rear. They followed the path Izuku had mapped out, navigating the treacherous terrain with a quiet efficiency that felt right. They found the nest in a large, open cavern, just as the reports had indicated. The ground was littered with bones and scraps of hide. In the center, the Iodrome, a nasty-looking creature with a distinctive purple crest and sickly yellow eyes, tore into the carcass of some unfortunate animal. Surrounding it were at least a dozen Iapri, their crimson scales standing out starkly against the gloom. This is it, Izuku breathed into the comlink bead in his ear. Choke point is that tunnel to the northwest. Just like we planned. Ida-kun, on my mark? He waited, watching the pack. They were feeding, distracted. Now was the time. Mark. Ida moved with a speed that defied his heavy armor. He charged forward, his lance held low, and slammed his massive shield into the ground at the mouth of the tunnel, the impact echoing like a thunderclap. He was a wall of impenetrable steel. The monsters shrieked in alarm and rage, their heads snapping towards the sound. The Iodrome let out a commanding cry, and the entire pack of Iapri charged. Yayorozu-san, now! Izuku yelled. From her position behind Ida, Momo raised her light bow gun. A series of soft fut-fut-fut sounds were barely audible over the screeching of the monsters. 3 Iapri at the front of the pack suddenly convulsed, arcs of yellow electricity dancing over their bodies, and collapsed to the ground, twitching. Targets paralyzed. Opening created. She called out. The rest of the pack swarmed around their fallen comrades, bottlenecked by Ida's shield. It was perfect. Uraraka-san, go! With a joyful whoop, Ochako vaulted into the air. Her insect glaive was a blur, sending her soaring over the defensive line. She descended upon the trapped pack like a hawk, her glaive spinning in a whirlwind of motion. She was a dervish of aerial attacks, striking and then vaulting away before the monsters could even react. My turn, Izuku muttered, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilarating focus. He stood beside Ida, his switch axe in axe mode. As the Iapri slammed against Ida's shield, Izuku used the long reach of his weapon to strike, not at their heads or bodies, but at their legs. A clean slice here, a heavy chop there. One by one, the Iapri at the front line found their charges slowed, their legs crippled and useless. It was working. His plan was actually working. It was a beautiful, deadly machine. Ida was the unbreakable shield, Momo the debilitating support, Ochako the untouchable damage, and he was the control, the conductor of the orchestra. For 10 minutes, they held the line. The Iapri, confused and frustrated, were being systematically dismantled. But the Iadrome had been watching. With a furious roar, it shoved its way through its own pack, its throat pouch inflating ominously. Incoming! Izuku yelled. It's going to spit! Ida, brace! The Iadrome spat a large, viscous glob of purple poison. It sailed over the heads of the Iapri and slammed against Ida's shield. There was a horrific sizzling sound as the metal began to smoke and corrode. My shield's integrity is at 85%. Ida announced, his voice strained. The toxin is highly corrosive. This was the part Izuku's plan hadn't accounted for. The sheer power of the Alpha's poison. Everyone, fall back. Scatter! He commanded. They broke formation just as the Iadrome spat again, a volley of toxic projectiles peppering the ground where they had just been standing. The battle had changed. It was no longer a controlled engagement. It was a chaotic skirmish in an open cavern. Midoriya-kun, new plan! Ochako called from above as she dodged a poison glob. Izuku's mind raced, flipping through the contingency flowcharts in his mental notebook. Contingency D. Alpha breaks the choke point. Protocol, isolate and kite. Shift from defense to mobile offense. Ida, you're its main target. He yelled. Your shield is a threat to it. You need to draw its aggro. Keep it moving, let it away from the toxic pools. Yayorozu, switch to poison S ammo. Let's give it a taste of its own medicine. Uraraka, stay airborne. Don't let it rest. The team adapted instantly. Ida, no longer a stationary wall, became a mobile fortress, taunting the Iadrome and leading it on a chase around the cavern, expertly blocking its charges and spitting attacks. Momo's bowgun fired a steady stream of purple-tinged pellets that burst on the Iadrome's hide, adding to its toxic load. Ochako was a constant nuisance from above, her kinsect leaving glowing dust clouds that she could detonate for healing or status effects. Izuku moved on the periphery, his switch axe flashing. He wasn't doing massive damage, but he was a constant threat. He would dash in after a charge, land a few quick hits on its hind leg, and then evade as it turned to retaliate. He was the strategist in motion, his eyes darting back and forth, tracking the monster, his teammates, the environment. He was no longer just calling out a pre-made plan. He was creating it, adapting it, second by second. It's slowing down, he shouted, noticing the Iadrome's movements becoming sluggish, a dark purple foam dripping from its mouth. The poison is working. It's going to enrage soon. Look for the tell. The tell came. The Iadrome stopped, shook its head violently, and its entire body flushed a darker, angrier shade of purple. It let out a roar that shook the very cavern, a sound filled with pain and fury. That's it! Izuku cried. It's enraged, but it's also exhausted. It's going to make one last desperate charge. Ida, get ready to counter. The Iadrome fixed its venomous gaze on Ida and charged, faster than it had moved the entire fight. Now, Ida-kun! Ida planted his feet, his entire body tensing. He didn't just block the charge. At the perfect moment, just as the monster's head was about to impact his shield, he thrust his lance forward. It was a textbook guard point, a master-level technique. The lance tip caught the eyedrome directly under its jaw, its own momentum driving the steel deep. The monster was thrown off balance, stumbling sideways, its head thrown back, exposing its soft, unarmored throat. It was the opening. The one he had been waiting for. All of you, now! Izuku screamed, his voice raw. It was a symphony of coordinated destruction. Momo unleashed a volley of her most powerful sticky ammo, the projectiles latching onto the monster's exposed neck. Ochako dived from the ceiling, her insect glaive glowing with power, and slammed down on its head, and Izuku charged. He switched his weapon to sword mode, the file glowing with stored energy. He ran, not at the monster's head or throat, but at its side. He leaped, planting his feet firmly against its flank. He jammed the tip of his sword into the soft flesh between its ribs. Elemental discharge. He roared, pulling the trigger. The switch axe shuddered as it unleashed its full payload in a massive, internal explosion. Izuku was thrown clear as the eyedrome convulsed, the sticky ammo on its neck detonating in a chain reaction of concussive blasts. The great beast swayed for a moment, let out a final, gurgling sigh, and collapsed to the cavern floor with a ground-shaking thud. For a long moment, the only sound was the four hunters' ragged, gasping breaths. They were bruised, low on supplies, and spattered with monster viscera and toxic slime. But they were alive. And they had won. A wide, triumphant grin spread across Ochako's face. We did it! She cheered, her voice echoing in the now silent cavern. Ida, for the first time, allowed his rigid posture to slump. He leaned heavily on his shield, a small, proud smile on his face. A flawless execution of adaptive combat strategy. A victory for teamwork. Momo was already reloading her bow gun, but she nodded in agreement. Your leadership was exemplary, Midoriya-san. You turned a chaotic situation into a controlled victory. Izuku looked at them, at his team. His friends. He had done more than just call out a plan. He had led them. He had adapted, improvised, and commanded. He wasn't the weak link. He was the core. The strategist. The heart of the party. He looked down at his hands, at the switch axe that felt less like a weapon and more like an extension of his will. He looked at the massive, dead monster at his feet, and for the first time since he had put on the armor of a hunter, he didn't feel fear or inadequacy. He felt a deep, profound, and overwhelming sense of belonging. He had found his place. The world was still a terrifying, monster-filled place. But he wasn't facing it alone anymore.